Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Value-Based Agreements. Are we going to see more or less of them? Sponsored by Actu-Real. I'm Dana Minyard, Associate Director of Technology for Scientist.com, the parent company of HealthEconomics.com. Thank you for taking time to join us in our ongoing webinar series. We're glad you're here today. Let's go over some brief housekeeping so you can participate fully in today's event. You should see an attendee interface on the right-hand corner of your desktop. You're listening in using your computer's speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select phone call in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. Today's webinar will be very interactive, and we invite you to submit your questions for our speakers at any time during the webinar through the questions pane of the control panel. We'll address as many of your questions as possible at the end of the webinar. A reminder, we are recording today's webinar and the full presentation will be available on demand. The link to view it will be sent to you within an hour or so at the end of the webinar. We invite you to visit healtheconomics.com and take advantage of the large number of resources available across the continuum of healthcare value, evidence, and access. Visit the website for up-to-date news, career opportunities, and resources such as blog interviews with industry leaders, white papers, benchmarking reports, and many more. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's panelists. Say hello to our moderator, Madhur Garg. Madhur is Director, Real-World Evidence and Market Access at LabCorp Drug Development. He has worked across global and regional roles in the pharmaceutical industry. He is a market access and pricing strategist with health economics and outcomes research backgrounds. His career has spanned Europe and Asia, working for various life sciences companies, including J&J, Lundbeck, and Leo Pharma. He serves as a Board of Studies member at Manipal University and is an adjunct faculty for health economics. He is a speaker, faculty for HEOR, MA, and RWE at various forums, and a peer reviewer for journals. And now, please welcome Michael Pace, founder and CEO of Palm Health Company, a strategic commercialization and market access advisory to global health technology and life sciences firms. Mike previously formed and led the market access, health economics, and real-world evidence team at prescription digital therapeutics pioneer Pear Therapeutics. Prior to Pear, he led the value, strategy, practice, and pricing and market access team of Icon PLC in the US and Europe, and earlier held senior commercial roles with RWE-focused digital health companies, including Om1, and with biopharmaceutical companies, including EMD Serono, Allergan, and Sanofi. Mike has been a leading innovator, global advisor, and thought leader, and trusted catalyst in the value-based contracting field, and is credited for developing the first value-based contracts with payers for biotech products and for prescription digital therapeutics in the US. And now meet Dr. Clifton Chow. Cliff is currently an HEOR consultant at Actu-Real. Clifton has over 20 years experience in data science analytics and HEOR management. He also has an extensive background in evaluation methods, market analytics, and quantitative analysis on big data. Clifton holds an MS in Applied Economics from Johns Hopkins University and a PhD in Social Policy from Brandeis University, Brandeis, pardon. And now also joining us today is Pierre Etienne. Pierre is currently CMO at Actu-Real, a healthcare services company he founded with his ex-colleague from Pfizer, Chitra Lili, a PhD in statistics from Stanford U, and a member of the American Society of Actuaries. Pierre spent half his career in industry in various roles from early clinical development to worldwide operations. He also has an extensive background in Alzheimer's disease clinical research and more specifically, in preclinical predictive markers of the disease in blood and CSF. He holds an MD degree from the University de Liège, Belgium, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. And now, Badur, I'm glad to turn the proceedings over to you. Take it away.
Thank you, Dana. This webinar was designed for an audience of specialists and non-specialists. I shall present the first slides, which are pretty generic, but the webinar will move into more specialized territory as it progresses. My slides are based on the OECD Health Working Paper number 115. This working paper was issued almost 2 years ago, so some things must have changed since that time. Next slide, Dana. Thank you. I have to start with some definitions that are useful. Real-world data are data relating to a patient health status or the delivery of healthcare that are routinely collected, either prospectively or retrospectively. And the sources could be Medicare, IBM Market Scan, insurance claims, or phase 4 trials in the US, for instance. Real-world evidence is evidence about the usage and potential benefits or risks of a medical product derived from the analysis of real-world data. It's interesting to know that the FDA definition of real-world evidence only includes clinical evidence. Now, managed entry agreements between manufacturers and payers are tools for achieving patient access to new medicines while managing uncertainty related to their performance or their budget or the budget impact of both. Value-based pricing has a different goal. It's to estimate the cost of achieving a quantifiable clinical benefit and assess its value. There is a link between MEAs and value-based pricing in the sense that one wouldn't invest in a value-based agreement unless the drug is plausibly cost-effective. Next slide. This slide is also taken from the OECD report. Some definitions are more popular in Europe than here. On the left are financial agreements that are based on the volume, and they have proliferated over the years and remain very popular. On the right are performance-based agreements that are based on outcomes, which reflect clinical benefits for targeted use in a specified population. They include a method on how to measure them, and they have a formula for price or reimbursement and implementation. And real-world evidence can be collected at the patient or the population level. And we shall focus on the box with most of the names: performance-based, value-based, outcome-based agreements, and so forth. And I shall refer to them with one single name, performance-based agreements from now on. We can move to the next slide. Yeah, we can move to the next slide, Dana, please. Thank you. So pharma likes performance-based agreements because, well, they can displace or eliminate ineffective drugs or competitors' drugs in a formulary. Payers like them because they can understand their financial risk and mitigate it. And patients like them because of easier treatment access. But there is something pharma dislikes. In the US, performance-based agreements that tie rebates to patient outcomes can trigger a new best price for Medicaid when a drug is heavily discounted or fully refunded for just one patient who does not respond well. And this is a threat, or at least this is described as a threat. We can move to the next slide and present the conclusions of the OECD report. I mean, the main ones, at least to my mind, are as follows. Coverage with evidence development agreements have so far had a poor track record of reducing uncertainty around product performance. Payment by result PBR agreements. They continue to be used widely, but they seldom generate additional evidence on product performance, perhaps because many of them still use continuation of prescription as an outcome, and it's basically an outcome of convenience, perhaps too often. The administrative burden of collecting and analyzing data can make them costly or very costly to negotiate and execute. And the confidentiality of the content of agreements and their results continues to be a barrier to independent evaluation. And the OECD has some recommendations, which are presented on the next slide. First recommendation, only use performance-based agreements when the benefit of additional evidence on product performance outweighs the cost of negotiating and executing them, because that cost, it's a big investment. Design performance-based agreements to address uncertainty of interest to both parties. I'll come to that in a couple of slides. Ensure transparency of process, ensure transparency of content, ensure actionable results, and facilitate sharing of performance results across countries, because this would have tremendous benefits if countries could use similar criteria for coverage decisions. Let's talk a little bit about those uncertainties and the uncertainties that those agreements could resolve. This is an important question because there are uncertainties at different stages of the drug's existence, and a performance-based agreement cannot possibly address them all. So here is a list provided by the Cancer Drug Fund in the UK that looked at uncertainties at market authorization, uncertainties in the requirements, post-marketing evidence requirements, and in the agreements. The most common one is the magnitude of long-term benefit, but there were others. Comparative effectiveness, generalizability to target population, relationship between biomarker expression and final clinical endpoint, and the uncertainty related to the collection of data in routine clinical practice after, oncology, when the patients leave the specialized oncology clinic. Next slide. I'm now going to talk about the track record of performance-based agreements in Europe. This is not an exhaustive review. I'll just provide 3 examples that struck me as informative. First one is Holland. In Holland, continued evidence development post-marketing has been found difficult to do, and from what the OECD report, it was abandoned. But at the time the OECD report was published, a new policy of conditional approval had been proposed. And it went like this, the subjected products would stay outside the basic package of covered products for a period of, this is a long period, 4 to 7 years. And during that period, the Ministry of Health would fund additional research and treatment of patients enrolled in studies, not just any studies. The studies would be based on a research protocol put forward by a scientific assessment body and approved by all stakeholders. This is not a simple thing to achieve. And the process and research results would be public, the prices would stay confidential, and health technology assessment would be conducted after the period of conditional approval. There is a situation with similarities in Sweden. It's on the next slide. There's the same sort of disappointment about continued evidence development. And the proposed alternative here is a new policy of conditional approval of coverage where the subjected products would stay outside the basic package of covered products for a period of 2 years, during which the firms It's the manufacturers who would provide additional evidence to reduce uncertainties and pay for it, I guess. And an HTA reassessment would be conducted after the period of conditional approval. Another example, very interesting example, is from the Cancer Drugs Fund in England. They describe their process, and it goes like this. It includes only product indication pairs for which it's feasible to address clinical uncertainties. It only includes pairs that are plausibly cost-effective. And there is a limited period of temporary coverage linked to requirements for evidence generation with a reassessment within a maximum of 2 years. The non-commercial parts of the agreements are transparent, and there is a clearly defined exit process with mechanisms in place for removing coverage for products not recommended by NICE, the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, recommended by them upon reappraisal. But I guess it's perhaps too early to say whether this is a success or not. Well, I look like I'm done with my generic slides. I shall now pass the baton to Clifton, who will talk about the US scene. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pierre. If we can advance to the next slide, please. So first, I think it's important to also remind ourselves the context under which these value-based agreements are occurring. And the primary one, of course, has to concern the use of real-world evidence in economic assessments. So there is a growing interest, right, given the anticipated volume of novel therapies, about 20 per year till 2025. But real-world evidence is rarely used for drug-specific clinical outcomes, such as effectiveness. Only 1.5% are used. Adverse drug event rates, even less than that, 0.5%. And discontinuation rates, about 1.2%. So the most frequently used data source are registry data, a little bit under half, about 41.1%. And real-world evidence industry-sponsored in 1/3 of the reports, about 30.2%. So there is significant investment in infrastructure required to support outcomes tracking and coordinations. And that's the context into which these value-based agreements thrive here in the US. Next slide, please. So here are some examples, and we quote these as older, that is within the last couple of years. Okay, examples of outcomes-based agreements or value-based agreements. So EMD Serrano, for example, for their Rebif high-dose beta interferon that for relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis patients, their contract with Cigna was for 2 years. Cigna tracks the hospitalization and ER visits and adherence, and would provide discounts tied to the adherence and event rates. So you look at Amgen's Repatha, and here they were contracting with Harvard Pilgrim and Cigna for their product, which is a PCSK9 inhibitor that lowers LDL-C in patients with FH or ASCVD needing more lowering at a maximum statin dose. And so under the terms of this contract, as far as we know, if their LDL cholesterol is lowered in the real world, similarly to what was found in the clinical trial, the negotiated rate will be maintained, or else there will be a discount that would be increased. They also provided an exclusive option on closed formulary coverage of both agents on the open formularies. Okay, and that is for actually Amgen's Repatha and SA's Regeneron's Prowlin. So How about Harvoni? So this is a Gilead product. And here they have a value-based contract with Catamaran and Cigna for their HCV combination therapy that is competing with one that was also in the market by AbbVie. The Catamaran makes a product that's exclusive in HCV through the specialty pharmacy, and Cigna that makes Harvoni exclusive for GTI with rebates tied to the real world outcomes in SVR. Okay, and then there's Aresa. All right, this is an oral TK one or TKI for EGFR plus metastatic NSCLC. So this oncology product, right, under this contract, AZ would reimburse ESI for the cost to treat the patients who discontinue before the third fill. Okay, and then finally, as part of this combination of older VBAs that we found was Entresto, and this is with Aetna, Cigna, and Harvard Pilgrim. This is an oral ARB NI for CHF, and the superiority is being tested versus ACEIs in mortality with respect to mortality and hospitalization. And here again, a rebate varies with real-world hospitalization rate that's compared against clinical trial data. So how about some more recent examples? So let's go to the next slide. And some more recent example would be one between UPMC and AstraZeneca for Brilinta. So in January 2019, right, UPMC and AstraZeneca announced this value-based contract for ticagrelor, a blood thinner that can prevent heart attacks, strokes, and other cardiac problems. And under this agreement, UPMC Health Plan will pay less for the drug if it fails to prevent a heart attack or unstable angina within 12 months of the patient's first onslaught of their cardiac arrest. And on the flip side, if the patient responds well to the treatment, the health plan will pay more. Patients will also see a benefit with increased access to Brilinta and lower out-of-pocket costs. Okay, let's look at another example, the next slide. So here's Harvard Pilgrim and Sparks Luxturna. So Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare signed a value-based agreement with Spark Therapeutics to cover Luxturna, their $850,000 gene therapy for the treatment of patients with confirmed mutation associated with retinal dystrophy. Now, Harvard Pilgrims pays for Luxturna but gets rebates if the treatment wears off after a certain period of time. So this arrangement will allow Harvard Pilgrim to access this breakthrough treatment for their enrolled patient population and cover their financial risk. Okay, next slide. So those are the examples, current examples for the US-based VBA contracts. And now I'm going to pass the baton to Mike, who will discuss VBAs for digital therapy.
Excellent, thank you, Clifton. And Dana, you can move on to the next slide. Well, thank you. It's certainly a delight to be able to describe and demystify what, frankly, is a truly novel arrangement that was announced in the United States for a brand new category of therapeutics at the end of September. Before we jump into that, and in doing that, there's a couple things that we'll walk through. We'll describe the parties to it. We'll describe the therapeutic categories specifically that the treatments belong to. We will describe the nature of the prescription digital therapeutics, the particular products, but as well as two particular elements of the digital platform that were really important parts and enablers of a really unique agreement. And then the elements and structure of this next generation of value-based agreement. Before we do that, though, I did want to open up with a couple connecting comments back to Pierre's and to Clifton's. And Dana, if you can move on to the next slide. Clifton had mentioned EMD Serono's REBIF agreement. As you can see, the press release and the news report of that agreement now over a decade ago, a long time ago. As well, about a year later, EMD Serono struck an agreement with one of the US's largest PBMs, Prime Therapeutics. That happens to be the PBM that we'll be talking about, one party to this new VBA with prescription digital therapeutics. But the point here, and it's a personal note, having been at EMD Serono and having partnered with my team on both of these agreements a decade ago, what maybe isn't well known is really the genesis as to why these happened. And over the course of the last decade, I think there's been a bit of a misnomer as to why VBAs come into play. And some of them, people looking for press releases or looking to have a particular perception in the marketplace, or frankly, looking to undertake scientific studies. In these particular instances, these were real business rationales to engage in these agreements. The reality around the initial Cigna agreement is that EMD Serono's product REBIF had been thrown off the formulary and became the first biotech agent ever with a double step edit applied to it from a UM perspective. And that was very early to have that type of management and UM applied. The Prime agreement was different. This was an RFP by the PBM to select a single interferon to be on its formulary. So these two agreements were really business enabling agreements that were customer focused and co-created with these organizations. Next slide, Dana. Another point that I wanted to make, some years ago, about 5 years ago, a client of mine, after I had left EMD Serono and started consulting and also working with big data startup Om1, I was asked by a client, what are the things you have to get right in doing value-based contracts? And I characterized it in kind of the 21 things, so to speak, that really need to be thought through very concretely and in depth. And essentially, these were the things that at the time, and I think still in a measured way, very much hold true, regardless of the therapeutic category, regardless of the health technology. Frankly, even have global, I think, merit as well, certainly not decisively, but certainly I think hold true in the US. So one point of view here on the mechanics of actually getting these things done, regardless of the technology or product in play. And Dana, finally, the next slide, an additional comment here is really what is kind of the latest trajectory with VBAs. And Clifton pointed out some of the stats recently in the US, but I did want to draw our attention to the work of Actu-Real Health, who recently published here in the last couple weeks its latest kind of annual update of OBC VBC activity in the US. And the slides that you're seeing, the charts that you're seeing really demonstrate the following. One is that over the past 4 years, according to the work of Actu-Real, where they're surveying some 45 to 50, 60 health plans on an annual basis. You can see in 17, the survey was 45. In this past year, the survey size was larger at 51. But the bottom line is, according to Actu-Real's work, the number of VBAs in the US has doubled over the past 4 years. So the quantity is growing at a substantial rate. Additionally, I think what we're also seeing, and the data supports this, I think our practical experience supports this as well, is that we're seeing segments starting to come into play across US payers and health plans, meaning we're absolutely seeing a segment of health plans that just simply aren't doing VBAs and aren't intending to do VBAs. And that's 25% of the market or so, 25 to 33% of the market. There's another segment of the market that's selectively doing VBAs. They stuck their toe in the water a few years ago. They did their first one. They're up to 2 or 3 or 4, but they don't have a strategic intent. They're not building the resources in order to really enable scaling of VBAs as a fundamental part of their business. But then there is this third segment that is definitely appearing in the US, and that's the set of health plans or other payers, PBMs, that have made VBAs common practice. They've fundamentally embedded value-based contracting with life sciences, biotech companies, pharmaceutical companies into their standard way of engagement, enabling market access. And in fact, with that segment of customers, VBAs are an expectation, and the infrastructure has been built to support that. And I think these are some of the telling trends that we're experiencing in the US, beyond the fact that we are starting to open up a higher degree of financial risk and a greater degree of outcome measures that are becoming part of VBAs in the States. Okay, great. So with that as a backdrop, Dana, let's move on to this novel agreement because it was pretty cool. And happy to say, proud to say, having been in paratherapeutics, proud to say that we were a part of this activity, a part of introducing this, and really excited to see it come into play. So a press release, a joint press release, both Prime and paratherapeutics released the following information that we'll walk through. But before we jump into that, who are these folks? Paratherapeutics is a name that is becoming more and more well-known in the life sciences and health technology space. Sounds like a drug company, isn't a drug company. Paratherapeutics is the pioneering developer of prescription digital therapeutics that we'll define a little bit more so in a moment. They actually have 3 FDA authorized products specifically for substance use, opioid use disorders, and chronic insomnia. They're actual indications, and these are products that are in market and prescribed by physicians today. Pear also has a substantial pipeline of products in a variety of other therapeutic areas, including psych and neurology and some other specialties. And it has a really interesting and growing platform of digital biomarker assets as well, complementing these treatments. It's a fast-growing organization that has announced a merger with a special purpose acquisition organization, and it's expected that we may see Pear on the public markets sometime soon. The enterprise valuation of the company was at 1.2. The other P in this equation, Prime Therapeutics, a long-standing, substantial pharmacy benefit manager based in Minnesota, a large organization, with a large number of employees, but most importantly, this is the Blue Cross Blue Shield pharmacy benefit management organization in the US. They do have other clients, but they're fundamentally owned by 20 Blue Cross Blue Shield plans in the United States, and do have 2 other Blue Cross clients, and they also have direct employer clients. They've been an innovator in numerous different ways, from predictive modeling and analytics, specialty distribution activities, and other programmatic innovations. Prime has been first and a leader in quite a number of ways. So these are the 2 parties to this agreement. Let's talk about now on the next slide what exactly these products were that are under contract. And first, what are prescription digital therapeutics? The definition that is being very much socialized and coalesced around by numerous industry trade organizations like the Digital Medicine Society, the Digital Therapeutics Alliance, and other organizations is what you see on the left. These are products that deliver therapeutic interventions. They deliver them directly to patients. They are patient self-managed, so it's patient directed. They use clinically based, clinically evaluated software. So these are clinically validated software to treat, manage, or prevent a broad spectrum of conditions or disorders. So software is medicine. Similar to drugs and biologics, not only are they treating serious disease, but they're actually built. The software is built under good manufacturing principles. These products have initiated and conducted randomized controlled trials. They've submitted the evidence to regulatory agencies in the US and, by the way, in Europe as well. Many CE marked, and these products we're speaking of today authorized by FDA as Class 2 medical devices. They received label claims from the Food and Drug Administration. A physician prescription is required for patients to initiate the therapy, and they're reimbursed very much like other health technologies, both drugs and biologics and/or medical devices, through either pharmacy or medical benefits. And they have barriers to entry. There's IP and regulatory exclusivity that are inherent in prescription digital therapeutics as well. So what are the products that Pear and Prime actually contracted for on the following slide? Two products called Reset and Reset O on the next slide, Dana. And these provide anytime, anywhere access to evidence-based approaches that are consistent with the treatment of substance and opioid use disorder. Won't get into the mechanics, but happy to answer questions. Their mode of action is delivering CBT, reinforcing that learning through fluency training, and utilizing this modality contingency management, which is very much a rewards mechanism to keep patients engaged that have these conditions engaged in the therapy and progressing through it. So patients get prescribed these products by their doctors. They're enrolled through a pharmacy enrollment form. They download it onto their iPhone, and then they begin using the product in a secure and a discreet way. Both of these products are comprised of an app downloaded from the store, so a patient-facing app, but also a clinician dashboard. And I want to be able to walk you through both of those because the elements of these products, right, unlike biology and chemistry, unlike a syringe and a large molecule product, right, unlike a bag and an infusion, unlike the assortment of pharmaceutical routes of administration and packaging, et cetera, this is literally an app and then a web-based interface for clinicians. So let's have a look at the app real quickly on the next slide. And essentially, again, downloaded from the App Store. We're not going to go through a demo, but this is providing therapy on demand. The therapy that is really treating as usual. It's standard of care therapy in a quality-oriented way. And it's addressing, it's allowing for the opportunity to, one, have that therapy delivered to the patient in anytime, anywhere in a discreet way on their own. It's allowing patients to report triggers and craving. And of course, these are addiction conditions. So those things are really important to report, as well as whether or not they use a substance. And interestingly, patients do report that. The Reset O product, its indication and label is in conjunction with mucosal buprenorphine. So there are adherence reminders that are built into this app, and the use of buprenorphine is also able to be reported. There's coping strategy reinforcement, and then I mentioned the contingency rewards. All of these features are recorded within the app, and all of the activity related to any one of these elements is also recorded in the app. So as you can imagine, with all of that data available, who would want to take a look at it, and how can caregivers that take a look at it inform kind of their care patterns, treatment decisions, or elevations or decelerations in activities that they're pursuing? And they do that through the clinician dashboard, Dana, on the next slide. So this is a web-based interface, and essentially care team members defined by the prescribing physician are able to log into a web-based interface and see all patients, and in this case, log in and see any patient and be able to very quickly recognize the core CBT lessons that have been conducted or done. They're able to review those. They could reassign additional lessons to them. They can manage the reward system. They can actually turn off any monetary awards if they don't want them. They can select the type, et cetera. The calendaring feature allows them to look at drug screen data, which is part of this as well, that can be reported by the clinician. So all of this is consolidated in essentially one big data ecosystem that both patient and provider have same access to same information anytime, anywhere, just in two different interfaces. So you can imagine how that for these two products, but by the way, for any other prescription digital therapeutic that enables such bi-directional transparency in healthcare delivery. At the same time, you can imagine the opportunities there. And one of those opportunities got announced in the September 29th agreement. So let's move on to what was this value-based agreement? What was really this next generation structure based on a next generation therapeutic that was described by the parties? It focused on three things: outcomes, it focused on engagement, and it focused on value. But there were also some key themes that the agreement, I would suggest, also focused on. First of all, things that are really important in the pharmacy community, and I know we have a bunch of pharmacists on the phone, and we have some health plan members on the phone, and we certainly have health economists that are knee-deep in prescribing data and medical claims data, but adherence, use, and wastage, right? Critically important key themes. Ultimately, those things coming together in the nature of this relationship, you'll see. Additionally, things that are kind of, I guess we're a bit more accustomed to, like healthcare resource utilization and total cost of care, those things pretty well embedded, right? We did those things back in 2010, some time ago. But what's really, really unique about this arrangement as well is focusing on the whole person, focusing on the care team, and frankly, focusing on what we know or we've coined in the US as the quadruple aim, and particularly two elements of that, really provider experience and patient experience. And because this is a software solution that both caregiver and patient both have this real-time transparent information, the experience opportunity is something that had never before ever been captured in a value-based agreement, and it was here. As you can see on the slide, the elements and structure are fourfold. Let me first begin with the two on the bottom in yellow that are a bit more kind of standard in the value-based agreements world. The first was resource utilization. So an element of the agreement, of course, not announced financial considerations here at all, but one element of the agreement is on the ability of Reset and Reset-O to help avoid hospital inpatient stays for the patients that are taking the products. Not something that's earth-shattering or new, but certainly something that doesn't exist in a lot of life sciences technology agreements with payers. The second is total cost of care, another one that has been in these agreements for quite some time, but again, including that common element as a fundamental basis of this agreement. An important one as well in the middle is something that the System Vice President of Prime Therapeutics shared in a recent AMCP podcast as well, and that is a discontinuation fee, which the AVP of Pharmacy described as remuneration from the company if patients were to discontinue utilization as well. So a very, very interesting element that I might describe as a warranty in those regards. And then finally, kind of icing on the cake here for the first time ever, and really because this next generation therapeutic is software, it is data, and it is care delivery bidirectionally informing, and that is provider product engagement, meaning that clinician dashboard that we looked at and the provider's utilization of that dashboard is also an outcomes and value-based element. Essentially, the provider's engagement in utilizing that dashboard is an element of this agreement. So quite a novel, really breakthrough agreement that we saw just in the past 6 weeks, again, in a brand new category of therapeutics. And from where I sit, I think this bolds as quite an accelerant in the scheme of US VBAs. So maybe to sum things up quickly on the final slide. From my point of view, a few things. VBAs have become pretty well embedded in the majority of access agreements in the US. One caveat, most health plans in the United States absolutely still expect the usual and customary rebates and discounts, and this is still an add-on. When will we ever see VBAs be the sole element without transactional rebates? Maybe not anytime soon, and maybe not ever, but that's kind of where things stand. Additionally, PBMs have also developed a variety of frameworks. Express Scripts has some standard ways of implementing VBA frameworks across condition categories that's publicly announced too and a part of the Evernorth website. These things I think will continue, and we're seeing more and more of this happening at other large PBMs outside of Prime, like we've seen here a couple times, Prime leading the way. Additionally, some common VBA measures: adherence, discontinuation, clinical outcomes, cost of care, they continue to be the most common elements, will be, but as technology continues to advance, I think we'll actually see more elements, just like we saw the prime and pair agreement actually bring to bear for us. And it's really because of the product. The prime pair VBA itself, I think it showcases fundamentally that this category has a unique opportunity because product utilization is known. It's completely transparent to parties at the same time. And in the drug world, that's impossible to actually know utilization. So a big shift here, and what that really does is the burden of administration of these agreements in the digital therapeutic space can actually shift from payer to innovator company for the first time. So the burden was always on, hey, payer, you've got to administer these agreements. That's not actually the case anymore. And with breakthrough technologies, there becomes more of a shared opportunity in this regard. And then finally, the last point, this deal also demonstrates the unique opportunity that we have for more informed patient encounters and to utilize that as a value generating element of VBAs. So all in all, it's my view that digital therapeutics are likely to become substantial accelerants in the US market for VBAs overall. This 24/7 therapeutic usage and understanding, absolutely a fundamental driver, as well as the ease of access to data itself. Payer perception of the need to de-risk coverage decisions, I expect, will also be a driver of additional VBAs because new technology isn't necessarily embraced readily, and early adopters are really driving this type of activity. So the opportunity for health tech companies to de-risk embedding their products into payer coverage policies exists here. And then one thing that maybe isn't apparent, hopefully this is helpful also to the audience, but that these products, these digital therapeutics products or software as a medical device, they have more latitude in contracting and pricing. Things like government price reporting and Medicaid best price do not apply to prescription digital therapeutics in the United States. So that opens up a completely different world of possibilities that I guess I would say Pair Therapeutics and Prime Therapeutics took advantage of and co-created quite a novel arrangement. So with that, I think we'll hand it back to Matter.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Mike. Very interesting. We heard quite, the spectrum from where we have come in the last 10 years and to the state of the art, if I may, with prescription digital therapeutics and, what has happened. So just a couple of, a time check. We have like 12 odd minutes left. We've had some questions from the audience. I wonder if we can answer all of them, but I'll, try to club some of the themes that have come up, in the audience questions, as well as, kick off this panel. So if I may invite all the panelists, that is Pierre, Clifton, and Mike, to turn on their cameras. So perhaps, first off, very interesting because, Mike, you referred that how, the Medicaid best practice does not apply to prescription digital therapeutics. And wow, that kind of, itself is a great start in terms of, getting one of the major hurdles out of the way. Can you just share whether the complexity of the arrangements and agreements we have, right? Given what you said with the Avalier report, clearly we've doubled in the past many number of years the number of risk sharing agreements, etc. But has the complexity of those arrangements also increased? And if you may share your insights as to how can the administrative burden, and you did mention that with prescription digital therapeutics, it's taken care of, how that has changed or decreased. It would be great to have your thoughts on that.
A couple thoughts, Matter. Number one, tech platforms are really enabling alternative opportunities to administer value-based agreements, and in its most simplest form, to take bets, right, on outcomes, to take bets on value of therapeutic administration. So tech platforms, big data platforms that are bringing representative populations to bear become an enabling feature to bet against, as an example. I think also I mentioned kind of the segmentation that I think is coming into play in the US across payers. The payers that are on, kind of the far right, those that have embedded outcomes-based contracting, value-based contracting into their operations, they're jumped up the learning curve. They've invested, they've got people. So this has become easier, right? It's become more efficient. It's become scalable for a portion of the organization. And that's just simply on the traditional biopharma side. Then you bring to bear this next generation of therapeutics, where essentially not only are you co-creating arrangements, but you're actually co-administering them, and you're sharing the burden of administering the contracts. Meaning, who knows whether or not a patient is adhering, or whether or not a care team member is adhering to the use or the oversight of the PDT? Answer to that question is the developer, not the PBM. Right? And it's always, oh, let's go measure total cost of care. Hey, payer, why don't you do all that work so that I can take the bet? And the payer's early response is, how much are you going to pay me to take on that burden? Right? And now we're at a completely different place with these new digital tax that are allowing for that burden to be shared.
Great. Well, perhaps the same questions to the other panelists, Pierre first and Clifton. We've clearly seen that there has been an increase in the number and complexity of such agreements. And, today we had the opportunity to at least very briefly look at some of them. How do you see, from your perspective, implementation challenges and, other challenges really affecting their uptake in the future, right? So one of the things that came up, Pierre mentioned it briefly, is about, this Medicaid best price, and how many things, what information is available in the public as far as such agreements go. So Pierre, would love to hear your thoughts on the future of risk agreements in terms of the outcomes research side of it.
Well, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
We can.
So I don't have the ability to foresee the future, but I think that in the U.S. The increased use of VBAs may remain curtailed as long as there is no method to avoid the threat of lowering of Medicaid best price triggered by rebates or reimbursement from the manufacturer to a patient in case of no response. But if they find a successful method, that may encourage more VBAs using payment by response for sure. Now, we can be sure also that the supply of new products is going to be there. We can assume that many of them will be expensive and will be plausibly cost effective, and these would be the products that would lend themselves to VBAs. But I have a little concern that I would like to share with the audience, and it may make some members of the audience cringe, but I'll share it anyway for the sake of spicing the discussion. And it has something to do with the threat of price competition in the future. We all know that a much lower price for an equivalent drug will always be attractive for a formulary manager, and this is something that might happen. I don't know what the probability is, but it might happen because it's the declared mission of a company called EQRx. It announced that price competition has arrived. They put their cards on the table and they give the numbers. A treatment that would cost $250,000, they will sell at $50,000 or something like that, 1/4 or 1/5. And their argument is based on the notion that the design and manufacture of transformative medicines is not becoming more difficult or more costly. It's simply getting simpler and cheaper. And this is, we are seeing this in the field of monoclonal antibodies. But it could happen to very transformative therapies in 5 to 10 years. So we could have. It's a scenario. I'm not saying it's likely, but it's a scenario we can think of. We can imagine a problem of congestion of transformative medicines with similar profiles ready to enter formularies. And if EQRx or other companies with the same kind of mission succeed, I mean, my impression that sooner or later price competition could be VBAs, so make them too complicated and too costly to administer. But I don't think that this is going to happen tomorrow.
Yep, absolutely not. So I'm just trying to make a note of a couple of questions, and one of the questions it comes from Diana Brixner, and it's perhaps addressed to regarding the pair therapeutics example which Mike quoted. So what was the evidence that is necessary for pair therapeutics to enter into a conversation with Prime? I mean, was it some sort of a precursor in terms of the initial evidence package that was required, or perhaps a trigger to the next question? Was this the original plan in terms of a risk sharing agreement or an outcomes based contract being the market access strategy for a prescription therapeutic, or were there certain setbacks in the way which kind of led to the company choosing this route?
So, Banner, would you like me to answer that? The way I'll answer it is it will be a great case, Harvard Business School case study one day, to get behind the scenes of all of that. I think the way to look at it is maybe more broadly. As all of the health tech prescription digital therapeutics companies go to market, it's just simply new ground for everyone. It's new ground for anyone and anywhere inside the organization, the developer organization, inside the payer organization themselves. So fundamentally, the question was evidence-based. Well, the evidence base is all of the evidence that Pear had at the time they launched the product, and at the time they spoke with Prime Therapeutics. I think there have been in the public domain. Pear has multiple clinical studies, randomized controlled trials that published and served as the basis of their FDA authorization. That one would expect would have been part of the evidence package. I think at Pear, and certainly with other prescription digital therapeutics companies, there's becoming greater and greater numbers of real world evidence publications, peer-reviewed publications on the use of these products in the real world. And we've seen numerous publications out of Pear over the course of time leading up to September 29th of this year. And I think we've even seen some publications after that. So it would appear to me and anyone looking into it that the evidence base at Pear is growing every day and is being reported out on. And same holds true for other companies as well. So I think that's what's being relied on in terms of the nature of interactions that got to this point. One could hypothesize a lot of different ways that this occurred.
Right. Great. Well, I want to make sure we give Clifton a chance to come in. So there is at least one question regarding the Medicaid, best price. And Clifton, perhaps you can share your perspective on the various examples, in particular the Pfizer warranty program around crizotinib, or Zelcari, as it is called, if I recall the name correctly. Can you please share your insights around how that worked and what are the things to learn from it?
Yeah, so the idea behind value-based agreements is really, in its essence, from an health economic standpoint, it's management of risk. And to the extent that risk and uncertainty increases with development of certain drugs, well, as a rational firm, you will look for opportunities to offload that risk. And that's exactly what Pfizer did with Xalkori in contracting with a third-party payer, right? An insurance company, essentially, to take on the risk and make the payments to both patients and payers if the product does not perform as expected. And that allows them to avoid this best pricing for Medicaid. And what would Medicaid think about that? Well, Medicaid hasn't really said that this practice, right, is something that they would not support, because they are kind of hinting that that the payments are not coming from the manufacturers, that the payments that are being given to payers and patients. And so that kind of offsets the scenario. And so, and if this incentive, and with implicit or someday maybe explicit support from CMS, this would lead to, again, what Mike has also been hinting to, and Pierre as well, a definite increase in value-based contracts. And that could be the wave of the future in controlling healthcare prices.
Great. Well, with that, I know that we are on the top of the hour. I'd like to thank everybody, the audience today, for joining in. There have been a lot of questions, which clearly, all of them we haven't had the opportunity to take them up, but we'll follow up, via email to get those answers. I just want to thank all our speakers today, Mike, Pierre, Clifton, for your insights. And we could go on for another hour, and even that would not be enough. But thank you all, and we'll definitely follow up. Thanks so much. Take care.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar, Value-Based Agreements. Are we going to see more or less of them? Sponsored by Actu-Real. Once you leave today's webinar, you'll receive a survey on today's presentation, and we would appreciate it if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You'll also receive a follow-up email shortly with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. On behalf of today's panel, Actu-Real and healtheconomics.com, thanks for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.